Brendon, good to be here.
Good to be here. Welcome everybody. Velocity Financial videos, just some helpful tips.
Is that what the name is?
I just made that up.
That's a terrible name.
Thank you. Hey, today Graham, talking about relationships.
Yum.
Good. Hey, and particularly in relation to buying property in relationships.
So I think this is a really big topic and it's an important topic. Maybe we could just treat it as an introduction and we could go into more of this in time.
Sure, sounds good.
In my favourite series, which is How to Divorce Well.
Okay, we'll do that next.
Okay, cool.
Hey, the first scenario, so buying a house with your mates. That's happening more and more because people simply can't afford to buy a house on their own. What do you need to consider in that situation?
So like all relationships, you need to think how it's going to end. If you're going to buy a house with your mate, normally that 5 years time frame. So how do we get out well and how do we stay in it well?
Okay.
Who's going to paint it? Are we happy to put a new kitchen in? Do we not want to put a new kitchen in? One person wants to spend the money, the other person doesn't want to spend the money.
And I think on all of those matters, so how you manage it while you're in it and how you get out of it, what would trigger getting out of it, what would that look like? Those discussions need to happen before you start.
Yep.
And I think they need to happen in writing.
Yep.
You might decide if you want to actually do that even more formally with your lawyer, but at least in writing. So when those events occurred, they're not a surprise and you can refer back to the conversation you both had.
We can talk about that more another time, right? There's heaps more there.
Okay, but exit strategy is pretty key.
Speaking of exit strategies, marriage.
Sure. Hey, so if you're buying a house with your first beloved,
29 years, Brendon, isn't it?
29 years almost, there you
Yeah.
go. So I was young when I bought a house with my wife, so it was pretty simple. We didn't have previous relationships, money from previous relationships, we didn't have kids, and so it was pretty simple. But even in that situation, if my beloved's family gifted her 100k to help with our deposit, there's some questions there, right?
So if Mrs. Ojala receives $100,000 and you bring that into the relationship and you then exit, if there isn't an agreement in writing around that, which we would call a relationship property agreement, then that $100,000, this relationship property gets split 50-50. You get to take $50,000 of Linda's grandma's inheritance, for example.
Which may not have been the intention.
Absolutely.
Okay. So having that thought through, and particularly even if you are in a relationship, so I've bought 150k of my KiwiSaver in, you've bought 30k, or because you're self-employed or whatever.
Sure.
Having those conversations via a property relationship agreement can be a really useful thing.
Yep.
Okay, cool.
It needs to be in writing, lawyer to lawyer, independent legal advice. If that hasn't occurred, New Zealand standard relationship property law applies.
And in those kinds of first relationships, lots of people are happy with that.
Yeah, that's right.
And so as long as people are aware of that.
Yep.
Okay. A little more complex if it's not your first relationship, so it's your second, your third, or your fifth, and you want to buy a house with that person, Graham?
Right. Well, no judging.
No.
Even more important to have the conversation. So if you think about second time around, let's say you're 50, I don't know, if only I was 50, and you wanted to buy a house again with your new partner, there's normally some kids, there's normally some assets left over from previous life.
You're further on in your careers,
Yep.
and so there might be a disparity there between the parties.
One of you might have a company, you'd be self-employed, one of you might be working for a salary, all those kinds of things. So there's a lot to bring together and then a lot to untangle, as well as how the kids feel about it. That's something else that lots of people don't think about. So again, it needs to be and we can talk about this more a lot, but it needs to be documented, very authoritative, in writing. Email to email doesn't count. It needs to be a formal relationship property agreement agreeing what will happen if the inevitable happens, which is death or separation.
And so I guess the moral of the story, I guess our major takeaway today is if you're buying property with somebody else, then
First of all, that's awesome. Congratulations.
Yeah. Have had those conversations formally before you start that process. At Velocity, we can certainly, we're not lawyers, so we can't give you the formal piece, but we can certainly point out the potential pitfalls, make sure you've had those conversations with the right people, and away we go, getting into that house you want to buy.
There's a lot of relationship advice in here, Brendon, isn't there?
Oh, clearly.
We've seen some things.
Yes, indeed. So we can help with that as well. Brendon, Graham, Velocity Financial, see you next time.